Hello everybody, I'm back with another tutorial. So I came across this tutorial a couple weeks ago that describes how you can render out your controllers inside your Maya file in order to be able to showcase your rigs, right? And since I have received some questions from my students already on how I made my controllers to show up in my reel. By the way, if you want, you can take a look at the entire reel on my website. Feel free to do that. It's actually found on my website. Here's my reel. You can always go and watch it. You can see that I'm having all the controllers for the parts that I'm showcasing, the rigs that I have done. I decided to showcase the controllers in a way that it's more appealing. So when I saw this tutorial, I realized that it's apparently everybody's challenge on how to make the controllers to show up, because as you know, Maya is not able to render out the curves. So I know 3D Max actually does it, but in Maya you can't render out the controllers. So when I watched this tutorial, I was so excited because it was like 10 years that I was not able to. I mean, I know that there are some workarounds for it, but seeing how Arnold is able to manage rendering out your curves and how much control you have on rendering out the curves using different ramps or colors, solid colors that you can have for them. They can even interact with your light, so you can see some shadows here. I really enjoyed this tutorial. But for the sake of making a reel, I feel like it's a little bit time consuming, because you have to go back to your Maya scene and re-render the entire scene, especially if you're dealing with render layers and passes and compositing, background, foreground, your character itself. It's gonna be very hard for you to render out your whole sequence again just to be able to render the curves and put that on your reel, right? And so I'm going to introduce a new method, another method that I did for my own reel a couple years ago, and still I'm using the same method because it's working, the result is nice, and it's easy to set up, and it's very fast. It's just rendering out the controllers as a separate layer and bringing them back into a compositing tool, for example After Effects or Nuke, and then put that on your already rendered sequence. So you don't even need to go back and re-render your entire scene. So I'm going to show you how you can do that, especially since it works for any type of, I mean, it's actually not caring about your render engine. You can just not have any Arnold render. You cannot have any V-Ray, Mental Ray, RenderMan, any render engine. It doesn't depend on your render engine. It's actually done locally in Maya, and you can bring it into compositing tools and just put that on your already rendered sequences. And I'm going to show you how you can do that. So I opened up one of my old files. It's 5 years old, I guess. This is my own film, and I decided to show you how I managed to bring in the controllers and put them on top of my rendered file. So it's not just rendering out the playblast. I mean, it's not just a playblast of my scene in order to be able to showcase the rig, but it's actually somehow more appealing. So when you put that on your reel, the result is going to be much more appealing. And I done that for lots of spaces that I wanted to showcase the rigs. For example, here I did the same method. Here I'm using the same method, and you can see that the controllers are actually pretty much visible, and I'm satisfied with the way that it's looking out at the end. So I'm going to show you how you can easily do that. So going back to this Maya scene, you can see that I'm having my scene opened up. I'm having the background elements, the foreground elements, the lighting setup, and everything. And the concept here is that I'm going to do a playblast of this scene in a way that I can actually bring it into After Effects and then can blend it with my rendered image. So this is actually the shot 13 of my film, right? It's only a final render sequence, right? And it's the same scene that I'm showing you in Maya. So it's already rendered. I don't even need to do the renders again. I have, I think, 10 render layers just for this shot. So why should I bother going back to my compositing file and bringing up all of those? I mean, rendering out the sequence with the controllers and bringing them into After Effects and do the compositing from scratch. It's gonna be very time-consuming process for me. So I already have this rendered sequence. I'm gonna go back to the same file, and this time I'm going to only render out the controllers, and I'm not gonna render them out. I'm going to just do a quick play blast of the controllers. And since I just want to show the controllers, there should be a way so I can hide the geometry. So the only thing that will show up in my playblast is going to be the controllers. So the issue here is that if I just simply hide the geometry, that's gonna work somehow, but I want to be more careful about that because I prefer to have a feel that the geometry is there, but it's not just showing up. And in a moment, you're going to see what I mean. So rather than hiding the geometry layer, I'm going to apply a black shader to the geometry. So the geometry is still there, but it's only blocking the controllers that are behind the geometry, right? It's going to give us a feel of 3D space when we bring the controllers and put them on top of the final rendered image. All right, so in order to do that, I'm going to select the geometry. And I'm going to assign a pure black shader, which is going to be a surface shader. Assign a new material, surface shader. Surface shader is not an Arnold shader. It's not a RenderMan shader. So it's a native shader that comes with Maya. So again, it's not depending on your render engine. Surface shader, all right. I can also hide all of these background elements so they're not actually showing up in the scene. And just to prove that it's not dealing with any render layer or anything, I'm gonna go back to my render layers. This is an old file that back then we had render layers. The new render setup was not introduced, so you can see that I'm having, I think, 10 render layers here. Just to prove that I'm not doing anything with these, I'm gonna just delete all of those. So you can see how easy this method is. So this is my master render layer. And I already applied that black shader to the geometry. I'm gonna hide any element that is not necessary to be in the scene, or I can even apply the same black shader to all of these elements. For now, I'm gonna just hide all of these elements. Okay. What else do I have? Any item that is not related to the Greek or the geometry, I'm gonna hide them. Awesome. Even the lighting, I'm gonna hide those. Also, since we are going to do a play blast, if you want, you can turn off the camera name, the gizmo here. So by going to show heads up display, you can just turn them off. So they're not gonna show up in the final image, the final play blast, I'm sorry. And I'm going to also change the background color to a black color. So the geometry is going to be blended to the background. And for doing so, you just need to do a combination of Alt and B on your keyboard to change the color of your background, right? So on PC is Alt B as background. Or if you're using Mac, it's Option B, right? To cycle through the different options that you have for the background color. And it's going to make the background color to black. Also, you just need to turn off the grid, so it's not going to show up. And you're almost ready to do a quick play blast and bring it into After Effects. But before doing so, I also want to go one step further and make sure that the curves are actually as beautiful as they can. And one of the methods that you can make sure that all of these lines are not that jagged. Let me actually go to the perspective view to show you what I mean. So I hope you can see these lines here. You can see that they are almost like very just having this step effect here. That's only because the viewport is not capable of making sure that all of these lines are smooth. And If you want, you can go to the viewport option box and go here in the anti-aliasing and turn on the smooth wireframe. Just focus on here, and I'm gonna click and enable and disable this option here so you can compare them together. Just look at here. Do you see the difference? So I'm making these curves to be a little bit more smooth, so when I'm doing a playblast, the result is gonna be much cleaner, right? So I'm gonna enable smooth wireframe. I'm gonna go back to my camera view, and I just need to do a quick playblast. And in order to make sure that the resolution of the playblast is big enough, or actually is matching to my rendered sequence, I just need to do one more step here. So I'm going to show you the resolution of my original rendered sequence by going to the file and bringing out the options or the information of this file. You can see that the resolution of the file is 1920 by 1080. This is a full HD resolution. So I just need to make sure that my resolution of the playblast is also matching to that. So when I want to composite them together, they're actually going to match together. So there are a couple methods that you can do that. I will go to the render settings. I'm gonna go here and just choose the same resolution for my output playblast. This is actually for my render, but I can, in the option box of my playblast, I can go and read those directly inside this option box. So here that says from the display size, read it from the window. I will choose from the render settings. I can even just do a custom here and type in 1920 by 1080. That's the same thing actually. And make sure that the scale is set to 1. Choose the codec that you want to have for your file. Save it on your drive. So make sure that you check save to file and give it a name, give it a path on your maybe desktop, or if you are having a folder of your project, set it there. I hope I did not crash Maya. All right, so I did not crash Maya. You will put it somewhere, maybe for now I'll just put it on the desktop. You have to give it a name here. If you don't do so, you will not be able to click save here. So just give it a name and hit save. And you will be going back to this main window of the playblast options. If you hit playblast, it will ask you whether you want to save your file or not. I mean, I think you have to save your file. So it's safe to go first and save it as a new version just to not mess up with our original file, and then go to the playblast option box and do all of those steps and do a quick playblast. I already did the playblast, and this is the result here. So you will end up having a file that is animated, and it's only the controllers. And if you look close here, you can see that some of these controllers are actually being blocked by the geometry. That's only because I kept the geometry there. It's only black, and the background color is also black. So the controllers that are behind the geometry are not showing up, right? That's cool. So if I go back to my Maya file, you will see that the geometry is there. It's only just black, and it's covering or blocking the controllers that are behind it. So now that we have these two files, I'm gonna go to After Effects. I'm gonna bring in my beauty pass, which is the original render layers, original rendered footage. And I'm gonna also bring in the playblast that I just did. I'm going to create a new composition based off of my original rendered sequence. If you click and drag that file on top of the make new comp here, it will make sure that your composition setting is matching to your original rendered sequence, right? And then you just need to bring in the playblast and put it on top of it. This is an old file. I know that the resolution is not matching. If you follow the steps that I showed you, you will end up having a perfectly matching control layer that is matching to your original render layer. The final step here is to make sure that you are using a blending mode that is add, which means that it's gonna add your playblast to your rendered layer. And since we chose a black color for the geometry and for the background, they will not show up. The only thing that will show up is these controllers, right? So this is cool. There are a couple more benefits to do it this way, and I'm gonna just quickly go over them. But before that, I will just show you how much freedom you have here. So for example, if you remember, I just hid all of these foreground elements when I wanted to do the playblast, right? You can keep them. You can keep the geometry and assign that black shader to this foreground geometry, so when the character passes by or passes behind these foreground elements, the controllers will also be blocked, which is going to be much cooler, much nicer if you want to just put the controllers on your rendered sequence. So at the end of the day, you're going to have some controllers that feel that you're actually inside this 3D space. All right. So when you're done, you can just quickly render it out as a new file and you're good to go. Before closing this tutorial, I want to show you a couple more examples, and also I'm going to show you how much freedom you have if you use this method in terms of being able to play with these layers and just make your reel to be more interesting. So I'm going to open up another file that I made for my reel. Okay, so this is another example that I did to include in my reel. You can see that I'm having some controllers here. I'm gonna just delete some of these extra layers that I have here that are not related to this tutorial. All right, I'm gonna delete this, and I'm gonna show you what I've done with these layers just to have more fun and make them more interesting. So this is my original playblast. I'm sorry, not this one, but this one. This is the original playblast. You can see that it's the same thing. It's a black background, black geometry, and the only thing that is visible are these controllers, right? And I just added that to my beauty pass here, right? And since I wanted to make them more interesting, you can see that these controllers, since I'm using the blending modes here, sometimes they're a little bit faint, I mean, in terms of the colors and the opacity. The cool thing is that you can always duplicate them and add more of those layers on top of them, right? So I'm having the same playblast layer. I just duplicated that and I put that on top of it. I did that again. I duplicated that one more time and I put that on top of it. And you can see that this one is actually having some glow effect, which is cool. That's only because this is a separate layer. I used a separate layer just for the controllers. I applied a glow effect to that, right? Just to make these controllers to shine in this shot. Again, this is a reel. I want to make sure that the reel not only is showcasing the technical parts of my skills, but also it's more beautiful, right? So why not just leveraging all of these effects that my compositing tool is giving me? So I decided to add this glow effect to that as well, right? One more thing that I wanted to mention also while we're in this file, you can see that I'm also having these wireframes here. I did the same thing. We're using the same method actually. So if I just solo this layer, this wireframe layer, you can see that it's actually again a black playblast. It's a playblast of my scene using the wireframes on the geometry. So if I go here, if I unlock this layer, you can easily change these colors of your display layer, right? And if I do another playblast without the controllers, I can get this wireframe pass of my scene. Rendering out a wireframe is always a challenge for artists, especially in Maya. There are lots and lots of different workarounds to be able to render out your wireframes. The challenge here is that if you're using a 3 smooth preview on your keyboard, look at this. This is the preview mode of it. If you try to use different methods that are out there, for example in Arnold or RenderMan or Mental Ray, they don't respect this smooth preview of your geometry. So why not just do a quick play blast of our scene in a smooth mode and on a black background and just bring it into our compositing tool. What did I do? So I'm back. The After Effects file crashed. Actually, it was my external hard drive. So I'm gonna just show you what I was going to talk about in terms of how far you can go with these render layers. So again, going back to this wireframe pass here, as I said, this is only black and white layer that I added that to my rendered sequence, and I just brought down the opacity of it, right? And I have more freedom on it. So in terms of having fun with all of these, for example, this wireframe or the controllers, since they are actually a separate layer, the cool thing is that now you have a freedom of, for example, playing with the opacity, even keyframe the opacity, right? So if in your reel you prefer to just start by showcasing nothing and then increasing the opacity, you can always keyframe that. And one more cool thing is that you can also, for example, create a mask on this layer. So I'm going to create a mask on it. Okay, so if you want to do something like this, I'm going to also give it some feather. So some feather to the mask, right? Let me also turn off the controller so we can just focus on the wireframes. So this is one more thing that you can do with these. Also, for example, if you want, you can animate this path. So I'm gonna bring this mask over, right? So the keyframe on the path, and move forward and bring the path to bring the mask to the right. And I'm going to just quickly preview what it's gonna look like, right? So this is one more thing that you can do in your reels as well. You can do the same thing on these controllers. So if I want, I can enable this one, for example, right? And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to create a mask. Okay, give it some feathers. Okay, I'm going to turn off the wireframe for now so we can just focus on the controllers. And I can go and animate this mask. So mask path, bring it over, move forward, and bring the mask here. And now if I play it back, you will see that I can play with the visibility of these control layers as well. So this is the benefit of having a separate layer for your controllers, for your wireframes and such, right? Okay, so just going back to my original reel, you can see that now you can understand what I've done here. So I have done that for a lot of spaces in my reel. This is mostly related to the parts that I'm showcasing the rigs that I have done, right? So here's the Mr. Blob that you were watching. This is another one. I'm using the same method. And as I said, since I already had these rendered sequences, I just needed to go back to Maya and do a quick playblast of the controllers. All right. So that's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'll be back with another tutorial soon.